I'm Rebecca Lowe Coulson. I'm States and Society Research Fellow at Policy Exchange. And today we're publishing a report I've written called Clarifying Income Distribution, a Question of Equality or Need. I think there are several points I'm trying to make, one of which is that whilst we can say as a whole income inequality is flat, there are some interesting stories within this. And often the data which is put out, people are very keen to pick one point or to pick one story, and I don't think they necessarily see the way this all interlocks. Second point, I think, is whether income inequality is something we should be focusing on. I think there's an inherent interest in this and looking at absolute standards without being aware of relative positions on the distribution is not only wrong, but is also it's inaccurate. I think it doesn't tell us enough about the story. It's also in terms of the kind of society in which we want to live. We do want to live in a society in which people have good living standards. Sometimes focusing on average living standards, therefore, or indeed the living standards of, say, people at the top. There's a big focus on the high earners. We know that their wealth particularly has increased. The 1%, the 0.1%, the 0.01% have increased over the last 30 years. There's little really to suggest, however, that that's had a big or seriously poor impact on people in the middle. Indeed, it's probably accelerated their living standards by increasing growth. I think in times of general economic difficulty, such as following our recent Great Recession, there's an assumption that people at the top manage to continue to do well or even continue to advance their economic welfare, whereas people at the bottom are hit disproportionately badly. However, that's just not the case in terms of the figures that we see, these statistics that this paper interrogates from the ONS. Indeed, the people at the top of the distribution are those whose incomes have not yet returned to the position they were at in 2007 2008, whereas the people at the bottom distribution are the only people whose incomes have not dropped in real terms. Now, you could say, well, what does that tell us about living standards? And I'd say, yes, it probably doesn't tell us sufficient, but that's just another argument for why we shouldn't simply focus on the distribution.
In recent years, there's been an intense debate in the United Kingdom about equality and the position of families and households at the bottom end of the earnings distribution. And I was very keen that Policy Exchange should actually examine the information that we have about this, because a lot of work is done by the ONS on this, and it offers a very rich field of statistics for someone to explore. And I asked Rebecca to actually look at this, and I think that she has found a mine of information, and to actually marshal that into a lucid and cogent note that people can turn to and have a rake through will be extremely helpful. I've certainly found it interesting, and I know that many of the artifacts and dimensions of the things she's actually found are very compelling.
The other argument that this report sets forth, I think, in terms of things that need to be clarified, is the justification for focusing on living standards based on the idea of our needs, rather than just equality in some idealised way. There are various forms of equality that we all want to have in our society. We want to be treated the same by the state, regardless of issues like our race or our gender. A society which was unequal in that sense, I think most of us would agree, would not be a good or fair society in which to live. However, equality in the sense of the distribution of goods, so whether that's wealth or consumption or income, many of these things related to our assets or to our market earnings, to our financial situation, is a more complicated and difficult thing to assess, not least because we have different desires and needs and preferences as individuals. We want choice. We've talked previously about the example of comparing the GDR and West Germany, and you could see in terms of the dispersion of incomes, you could argue that East Germany was more economically successful. Well, I certainly don't see that as the kind of success that we in a modern advanced economy should be hoping for. Really, we want one in which we can have freedom of choice in terms of our spending and our investments. We want freedom in other senses too. So just looking simply at the distribution of income in society just doesn't tell us enough, I think. It certainly doesn't tell us about the living standards and the needs that we would hope as members of a free and fair society. What we really should be interested in is the living standards of people in our country, and particularly those people who suffer the most, rather than how equally distributed income is, because equality is not the same as the alleviation of poverty.